English at Glenbrook South High School in Glenview for the past 15 years. While the rest of us were slowly adjusting to a changing digital world, Scott from the outset embraced the future of digital media and has been a leading innovative teacher. Throughout his teaching, he has incorporated and integrated media literacy into his classrooms and curricula. This used to mean helping students understand the ways media functioned. But more recently, however, his focus has evolved to working with students to make sense of the complex surrounding digital networks and its impact on learning, identity, and community. And these interests have led him to his brilliant master's thesis, from which this talk is abstracted. The kids are online, reading and writing in the digital age, and this truly is. It's a progressive, important, original, dynamic project that boldly leaps into the future of literary scholarship and pedagogical practices. Scott cogently argues that digital media is not simply another technological innovation, but rather a radical restructuring paradigm and democratic tool that refigures the meaning and practice of writing, reading, and thinking. To take digital media seriously means assuming the responsibility of a changing world. Just love this quote by media theorist Ray Kurzweil, who recently stated that kids today have access to more information than the President of the United States did 15 years ago. It's an amazing thing. As Scott forcefully and persuasively argues, as educators, we cannot continue to teach as if the digital revolution was not and is not occurring. We need to prepare students for this changing world, and in turn, we need to change our reading practices, writing assumptions, and thinking habits. Scott's project broaches important, pressing questions, and his research opens paths and concepts that truly are transformative. On a personal note, it's been an absolute pleasure and honor to work with Scott this past year. My own thinking, my own teaching is indebted to his research, and I'm so glad that you're here to present your work, and thank you for being here. Scott class, everyone.
Well, okay, thank you for that introduction, Ryan, and the feeling is mutual. This is the culmination of over a year of dedicated work just on what you're about to see, or this is just a small part of it, but as Ryan said, this is something that I've been thinking about more and more in my own teaching. So, trying to think about how to start this, I decided that I would show a story that I created a few years back. This is actually something I wasn't planning originally on starting with what I'm about to show you. Unfortunately, my grandmother passed away just over this past weekend. And as I was thinking about, she was a fantastic storyteller. And one thing that I remembered was that about 4 years earlier, I had the fortune to go out to Berkeley, California, to the Digital Storytelling Foundation, and to learn digital story making. And I made this story based on something that she had told me. And so when I went and looked at it again, I thought, actually, this might make a nice way to start up. So hopefully the technology is going to work here, including the volume. But we'll watch this in just a couple minutes, and then I'll get going. And it's not. Oh, it's moving. Yeah. You should be hearing something too. So.
Is the volume at the bottom?
Yeah, the volumes.
Do you want John to stand next to you?
John? Where's John?
It is still.
No, it's not playing. There's two.
We really were here about an hour ago. It all figured out, I swear. Okay, well. Come closer. Yeah, this one.
Oh.
She shook her head.
Oh.
And I was like, would you like me to start?
Yes, yes, yes.
How about this, actually? I had had some music even at the beginning, too. All right, so here we go. My grandma leaned down closer to me so I could hear her over the noise of the people who had come to pay their respects. My hand was on her knee, and she covered it with her own. And I looked at him in astonishment. "Jerry," I said, "where have you been for the last 5 hours? Where did you disappear to?" "Driving," he said. She dabbed her mouth with a napkin. So the next day, he told me to come with him. When I said no, he sat in the driveway, honking the horn. "One honk at first," she said, "and then a whole bunch." Stepping outside, she saw him behind the steering wheel. He leaned out the window. "Come on, we need to go." "Jer, I'm barefoot." He looked at her impassive, and then he honked again. And again, staring right at her. He could be so stubborn, domineering. Still, she decided that if he was going to die, she might as well be with him. Her eyes were fixed on mine. Too weak some days to walk to the bathroom, and he had been driving. She shook her head. "And I went with him," she added with a collected sigh. "Oh, can you imagine?" But I wasn't thinking about frail legs. Instead, I thought about my turn on his lap, gripping the steering wheel. Outside the windshield, maybe there was corn, rail yards, sun, rain. On his lap, though, there was the sharp smell of cologne, the chill of the air conditioning on my legs, his deep sandpaper laugh that shook my body. He leaned his stubbled chin against my ear, placed hands of knotted oak over mine, and whispered. More people walked over between my grandmother and me. They bent down to kiss her cheek and put a hand on her shoulder while she nodded at their quiet regret. When they moved on, our eyes locked. She leaned back, shook her head slightly. "Can you imagine?" she asked again. Yes, we both could.
And if you put it all together, you won't have to look around. You know you cast a long shadow on the ground.
Okay, so I made my mom cry. Presentation has been a success.
Thank you, Scott.
So, okay, of course I did not make that digital story to become famous, to become rich, to become a professional filmmaker. Right? That had nothing to do with it. To go throw, yes, I made it to make my mom cry. Right? The reason that I made this was much more personal. I made it because I wanted to create and I wanted to remember. You know, for me it was about, here's this story that my grandmother told me that is so important to me, and I want to take that, I want to be able to remember it. Now, I'm not about to stand here and say that that's what digital technology affords us, right? Digital technology now lets us remember our stories more clearly and more vibrantly, because, I mean, you know, as human beings, we've been telling stories for thousands of years, right? I mean, that's how we taught each other, that's how we entertained each other for a long time before we had any kind of written language. So again, as human beings, we are naturally storytellers, and that's the way that we have always tried to communicate the things that are important to us. What I would say about digital technology is that it expands what an amateur like me, like what I can do. Because I also obviously know that for the last 40 or 50 years, people have been able to take home movies. So that's not even that out of the ordinary, right? Okay, I have a home movie, you know, and I have some pictures of my loved ones. But the fact that I was able to bring all these different pieces together, that I was able to write this story and then narrate it, over which I had images. I mean, there were some of those images that I actually took, you know, me with the car and that old car. It happened I just found it, saw it on the street, and took some pictures of it. But then I was able to put those pictures into Photoshop, change them around a little bit, and I was able to go onto Flickr using Creative Commons, take a whole bunch, which is a term I'll come back to for those not familiar with Creative Commons, but bring all this stuff together, the song by Joe Strummer, and in this way, really not even mimic, but actually take part in the process that the professionals use. And I did that on Final Cut Pro, which is a pretty decent piece of technology. You know, definitely more powerful than iMovie, although also pretty easy to use. But still, it's the same kind of creativity and process used by professionals. And I just know that when I was making that story, as I said, I was at this conference in Berkeley, and so for 3 days we were dedicated to the story. And it was the most incredible creative process that I've been through. It was so intense, but the more I did it, the more I just wanted to keep doing it. You know, and that's the key thing. I think that's what digital technology and Web 2.0 provides, is these possibilities not just to be creators, but to create in these new and very profound and very deeply moving ways. So I just want to stop here for one moment, not stop, but just I'm going to give a couple of definitions as we go along, because I'm sure there's some of you sitting here who know, when I say Web 2.0, when I say Creative Commons, you know exactly what I'm talking about, but I'm sure there are other people in the audience who might not. So, Web 2.0, it's a term that was coined, as far as I could tell, by this guy named Tim O'Reilly. He used to be one of the editors of Wired magazine, and he's, now he has his own media company. He's considered media guru, right? Social media guru. He coined this phrase, Web 2.0, to differentiate what started happening in the 2000s from what the internet was like previous to that. So in the 1990s, late 80s, through the 90s, I guess you would say you had Web 1.0. Web 1.0 was really still akin to the old media hierarchy. True, more people could publish than what we had before we even had the internet. I mean, even with Web 1.0, people were able to make their own idiosyncratic websites and fill them with whatever they wanted to. However, there was no real communication back and forth. That's the key difference, right? So, yeah, in the 90s, we already had an internet that was kind of exploding with information, but it was all directed one way. You had a producer and you have a consumer. And those two roles were very static. That was it. Now, Web 2.0 flips all that around. So now what we have is the ability to not just be a consumer, right? Not just to be an audience, but to also speak back, so you get communication going in all different directions. And as an audience member, I can also say, well, I like what you've done here, but you know what? I think I'm going to take half of it, add it to a couple other things that I've seen, and republish it as something else, and add my spin to it. So this is what Web 2.0 is. So it also gets at social interaction, collective meaning making. Here's just a little graphic. I know the writing is kind of small on it, but you'll see the logos for a lot of the stuff that you're used to using online. And we'll talk about Web 2.0 in terms of the social media landscape. These are some of the things we are referring to. The applications that allow people to not just create using the cheaper and cheaper digital technology, but then to publish, to share, to discuss. You get into the social networks and it winds around. And of course, again, I just found this on Flickr and took it off, and here it is in my presentation. Because this person who made this chart listed it in Flickr under Creative Commons license. Creative Commons license is an alternative copyright that allows an artist or anybody to publish on the web and say, okay, you can use my stuff for the following things. So you can use my stuff and you don't even have to give me credit. You can use my stuff, but you have to give me credit. You can use my stuff, but you can't change anything. There's different levels that you can decide what people are going to use it for. All right, so now we're at Web 2.0. That's where we are right now. So what are people saying about it? Where we are at right now? Well, it seems to me, and I'm sure for some of you as well, that as with most things, most of what I hear is the extremes. Right? What we have on the two sides. So on one extreme, there's this perspective. And hopefully everybody can see this. Maybe, well, can you see it? Okay.